At this point, I am practically convinced that the number one goal of the mainstream media, combined with the Fed and the government right now, is to just trick and confuse people into believing that things are way better than they are. And I have a lot of reasons and data here to back up this claim. But basically, people are kind of running on a few different data points that keep getting repeated throughout the news recently that kind of trick people into thinking things are going way better than they really are. Like, for example, a few weeks ago, we had the most recent consumer sentiment survey, right? And that went up by 29%, which was the largest 2-month increase since 1991. I talked about this a while ago, back when this first happened, but people were going crazy about this, that, oh wow, everybody's feeling so much better about the economy, so that must mean things are going well, okay? Once again, a misconception, that's kind of pushed by the media when you see this, but isn't actually true for the everyday average person's life. Then you have data points like this. The percentage of American adults who expect their finances to be the same or better a year from now is 76.5%, which is the highest number that we've seen since September of 2021. According to the New York Fed. Now, I will agree with the fact that people are in a much better headspace today psychologically than they were during the pandemic, which is something that is talked about here in this story. But it also says people are better off financially today than they were during the pandemic. And I would have to completely disagree with that, guys, because you don't have to rewind that far back in history to remember what happened during the pandemic. People were at home, a lot of people weren't working, and people were getting free money to stay at home via unemployment, via PPP loans, via EIDL loans, via stimulus checks, and people didn't really have to worry about money for the most part during this whole thing because the government was making sure people had money. And so to sit there and say that everybody's in a better space financially today than they were during the pandemic is a flat out lie, especially with how much households have been struggling with inflation and all different types of debt, which we're going to get to later in this video. But that kind of brings me to my next point. One of the things that they keep perpetuating of why things are going so great and trying to make people believe that that is the case is because of slowing inflation and because of wage growth. They say, oh, well, inflation's only gone up 18% over the last 3 years accumulatively. Like, huh? You got to be kidding, right? All you got to do is go back and look at the shadow stats data to see that the way they calculated inflation back in the 80s and 90s, we already hit 18% inflation in 1 month over this past couple of years, let alone cumulative for the past 3 years. That's a joke, guys. And to be honest, I'm kind of surprised that the news even has the nerve to bring up wage growth as one of the reasons why people are feeling good about this economy. Because take a look at this chart. This shows you the 3-month average of median wage growth in hourly wages, basically from 2021 all the way through present day. And if you see towards present day, it's hovering right around 5%. But at its peak, even when things were at its best, back in the middle of 2022, it only peaked around 6.5%, maybe 7%, right? Well, even if you go by the official inflation numbers back then, where was it, guys? 9%, right? So consistently during this entire time that we had the run-up in inflation and it coming back down, the wages have not been keeping up with these inflation numbers. And let's be realistic, all these inflation numbers are ridiculously underreported anyways, because the main things that people need to pay for the most are the things that have gone up the most in price, like food and shelter and energy, and now insurance on everything as well. Those things have all skyrocketed by multiple double digits, not by 3.1%, which is the most recent inflation reading, okay? So to say that wage growth is a reason that people are feeling good about things right now is also a flat out lie. And then they go on to say here how, before the pandemic, the average wage growth was only about 3.5%, and touting now that it's closer to 5%, that this is somehow good for people. Like, listen, guys, this is not anywhere near enough for people to actually continue paying their bills at today's prices. That is just the reality. And I don't think anybody out there would argue with me on that, unless you're somebody that is lucky and has been getting massive wage increases year over year. And that's pretty much nobody. But the next data point they continue to use and say this is another reason that things haven't been better is the low unemployment. They're saying despite all the interest rate hikes, we still haven't seen a spike in unemployment, which typically happens, but it's not over yet, guys. We still have high interest rates. The Fed hasn't lowered rates, right? So once again, an early celebration here about how things are going great. They say that many people were conditioned to expect a recession and we have not experienced one, and that has buoyed consumer confidence. So because something that's inevitable to happen hasn't happened yet means that people are more confident than ever. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense, guys, especially when all of the traditional data points point to the fact that we will have this recession at some point. It's just a matter of when, not if. But if you ask me, that just goes to show you how well that stories like this are working to brainwash most people into thinking things are better than they really are. I mean, let's just pull up the shadow stats numbers here real quick, because all these things that they're saying are so great actually are not that great, okay? Look at the unemployment, guys. If you go by shadow stats unemployment, it is actually closer to 25% right now, not the 3.2% that the government is claiming, which is, ridiculously lower. Like, that is such a disparity. Don't ask me how they come up with this number, but what I do know is that these figures are all calculated based on ways that our government used to calculate unemployment and the CPI data, and they no longer do. So they basically changed the rules of the game at some point and are able to finagle these numbers into looking a lot lower than they really are. Now, this chart's a little bit outdated, but the point is still the same. It's from June of 2023, but it just goes to show you the blue line is how we used to calculate inflation in 1990 and 1980 respectively, compared to the red line of how they're doing it today. And the difference is shocking, to be honest. Now, this data point that they keep using to basically trick people into thinking things are great is kind of the most disgusting one of all, if you ask me. And that is the stock market performance, but really, more specifically, the performance of the S&P 500, because it gained 25% in 2023 after a 20% loss in 2022. So people are supposed to celebrate that this is amazing, guys, but nobody wants to look at it. All just comes down to the Magnificent Seven responsible for all this growth. Nobody seems to care that it's just the world's largest tech companies that are contributing to these gains, and literally no other sector of business is doing great right now. No one cares about that. I mean, if you're an independent business owner, a small business owner somewhere out throughout the country, I'm pretty sure you care about that a lot. And the reason why I think this is the most disgusting one is because the vast majority of people are not invested in the S&P 500 and are not benefiting from this huge run-up that we've seen in the stock markets. So my question is, why on earth would this influence how people feel about their day-to-day finances or the economy? It's just yet another trick. It's another diversion of things appearing to look better than they are, guys. On the surface, all this stuff does look great. But just like Japan and the UK and Germany, they all have all-time high stock markets right now too, and they're all in a recession now. So people need to wake up and realize that just because all these data points, even if they're all 100% factual, which most of us probably believe that they're not, that's not enough to keep you out of a recession and keep the economy from going under, okay? In fact, pretty much every time in history we've had a recession, it's always been like this. The big party, the big blow off before things start to go downhill. Why is this time any different? It isn't. It's just that this party and this big blow off is so tremendous and so huge that it makes it look like it could never go down. That's what I think, Now here's the other part of the problem, guys. Too many people are being told to look that way instead of look this way. With everything we just talked about, people are focusing on all of those things that appear to be good on the surface, but in fact do not really support a truly great economy, because if it did, then Japan, UK, and Germany would not be in recession if that were true. But what really matters is how people are actually doing in the real world, financially speaking. And all we have to do is look at credit card debt in order to prove that things are not going well for the average person right now. These credit card debt numbers continue to hit record highs basically month after month here. And it's not just the fact that the credit card debt is going up, but the serious delinquencies on the debt is also simultaneously rising. So I've heard people say and argue a lot of times that, well, the credit card debt going up is not necessarily a bad thing if people are paying the bill, right? If people are making enough money to continue that form of spending, then it's not a big deal that the credit card debt is going up. But that's actually not what's happening. First of all, one big red flag that we've seen recently after the holidays is a huge uptick in the amount of people that are using a credit consulting agency, or basically for credit counseling, guys, because they're too far into debt and they have to do something about it. When you take a look at this chart, it shows you how many people and in what age group are reaching out for credit counseling. Right now it looks like people between 31 and 40 are in the most trouble, but actually the biggest worry is for the youngest generation, people in their 20s and millennials, because it's the fastest growing group of people who are in trouble financially and have the least amount of money to lose, essentially. But it actually gets much worse than that, guys, because according to the New York Fed, total household debt in the US has risen by more than 24% since before the pandemic and now sits at a whopping $17.5 trillion. So if everybody's wage growth was so great that they keep talking about here, that, ooh, it's at 5% right now, was really enough to keep things going, do you think people's household debt would have ballooned to 24% higher over the past few years? I'm thinking no. And guess which one is the fastest growing debt out of all of them? Credit card debt. That's right. The latest figure is 1.13 trillion in credit card debt, which went up by 4.6% just in the third quarter of 2023 alone. Also, what else happened recently, guys? The amount of credit card debt that people are carrying, the average balance, has also hit an all-time record high recently of close to $6,000 that people are carrying. That is insane. That is really bad when you're talking that credit card interest rates have absolutely skyrocketed. And we're talking literally 49% of Americans right now carry a credit card balance month to month, which also debunks this theory even further that, oh, it's not a big deal that credit card debt's going up because people have the money, they're making more money, so they're just charging more and paying off the bill. Well, that's not true, because the delinquency rates are going up, which we're going to get to here in just a second. The amount of people carrying a balance is basically half of all credit card users, and the amount of the balance that people are carrying hit a new record high. So all of that stuff debunks the fact that people are able to actually pay these bills, because they're not. And check this out, guys. Here's another chart that proves this. You know, Americans are struggling to pay their credit card bills more than any other type of debt. And you have 6% of all credit card balances right now in serious delinquency, which is more than double the rate that we saw just 2 years ago. And I think that pretty much lines up, because 2 years ago was the beginning of 2022, which was when we really started to see price inflation on everything start to skyrocket. You know, 2022 was the year that the government gave us their stupid 9% CPI reading, when it was probably closer to 20% at that point. But that was the time where everything started to really skyrocket in price, okay? And the thing is, the credit card delinquency and the credit card debt backs that up. When you take a look at this chart, it shows you all different types of loans that people are 90 days delinquent on or more, and what's the trend line with it, okay? Student loans obviously was not going too well up until they put a pause on them, right? So that was just dropped all the way through the floor. But credit cards, the line right below it, the blue line, has absolutely been surging recently, just like it did back in 2008. The last time credit card debt surged was when we had the great financial crisis. And I think one of the last ones on this chart that's really going to pick up steam eventually is going to be the mortgage delinquencies, because you can see the yellow line is the mortgage delinquencies, and back then we had it skyrocket during the great financial crisis, right? Well, right now it's still pretty low, but it is starting to tick up, as you can see. But auto loans, those are basically at the same level that they were during the great financial crisis, okay? You can see that has exploded recently as well. So really, the only thing holding up sort of strong right now is mortgages, guys. That's like the last shoe to drop before things really start to go bad. And yet they sit here and have the guts to say that things are going well right now because we don't have the surge in mortgage delinquencies yet. But I guess they're not paying attention to the fact that people aren't paying their car loans, people aren't paying their credit cards, and of course they're gonna stop paying that stuff before they stop paying the mortgage. People need a place to live. Who wouldn't rather go deeper in the credit card debt and lose their car before losing their house? I think basically everyone would make that logical decision. And they're saying, well, the excuse they're using to kind of defend this of why it's not a big deal is they're saying, yeah, well, at least if people don't pay their credit card bill, it's not going to result in them losing their home. Okay, that is true. But if they can't pay the credit card bill, that means they're clearly struggling financially, and they're not paying the car loan either. So there's only one thing left to stop paying, guys. To say that that's not going to have an effect on that at some point down the road, I think is a fantasy. There's no way that that's going to be the case. And the thing is, with these high interest rates, it's also crushing how much people are going into debt with these credit cards. Take a look at this chart here that shows the average interest rate on the credit cards right now. Okay, it has ballooned. Before the pandemic, it was hovering around, anywhere between 13 and 12% in most cases, right? Now today, the average is well over 20%. So it has almost doubled over the past several years. And for these people who are carrying a balance, that's bad news. It's going to continue to compound their balance, and they keep using the cards in order to just pay for regular life right now. It's a horrible spiral to be in. Right now, they're saying the average American is spending $1,140 a year, which is about 2% of their pre-tax gross income on credit card interest and fees alone. That's scary. And guess what? This doesn't even include all the buy now, pay later debt that has been exploding recently as well. More and more people are turning to this. I even did a full video how people are financing alcohol with buy now, pay later loans because they're just broke. They're just using every single available form of credit out there right now to continue buying things they normally would buy until it's not possible anymore. And guess what? The buy now, pay later loans have actually jumped by 1,000% from 2019 through present day. So a 1,000% increase in anything is something to be looked at. And is that a coincidence that this is just happening, during this time frame? Of course not. It's because people can't afford the bills. So I don't know why they keep telling us that we have avoided this recession, because all these data points to me point to the fact that we're headed straight into one. Or we already are in one and they just don't want to admit it yet, because all the numbers look great, but they can only hold on for so long, guys. Just like Germany, Japan, and the UK. And speaking of other countries, you know who else has been getting hit with these crazy car insurance increases? It's not just us here in the USA, it's happening worldwide. They say that people are spending so much on insurance right now that it's actually starting to have a macro effect on the greater economy right now. That's how much insurance is impacting people's budgets. Between now and 2019, auto insurance rates are up on average about 39%. And in the UK, it's even worse because the auto insurance premiums there have jumped by over 64% during the same time frame. And if you take a look at this chart here, you can see that they have it way worse in the UK than we have here in the US. And the Eurozone is still seeing an increase, even though it's not as sharp as the UK and the United States, but they're still getting hit with increases over there too. And I don't even know if it's worth getting into the reasons why insurance is going up, because to me, you can't really believe any of this stuff anyways, as far as why it's happening, because they can just raise rates just because they want to. But the excuses are, secondhand cars and parts have gone up in price, you know, repair costs have gone up, which makes it more expensive to fix. Those are legitimate excuses. Is that the actual reason? Have repair costs gone up by 40% or 64%? Probably not. But just like here in the US, all these insurance companies over on the other side of the world are claiming that even though they've brought in record amounts of premiums, all those premiums were actually lost due to all the claims they had to pay out. But because they're having a hard time getting back to profitability, or at least they claim, that's why we're seeing an increase in premiums. Oh, of course, they need to make money, guys. This is not a charity, you know. Having insurance is not for your benefit, it's actually for the benefit of the insurance company. Who would have thought? But they also go on to say here that, well, you know, accidents have become more frequent and people are getting more reckless, and accidents are just more severe now since the pandemic. Of course, they conveniently leave out the fact that EVs are responsible for a lot of these accidents in terms of how severe they are because of how heavy the cars are. And I realize, guys, that there are gas-powered cars that are heavier than some EVs, but the reality is when you take a similar sized car like a regular Tesla and put it up against a regular internal combustion engine car, that Tesla is going to be significantly heavier than a similar sized car. There's no disputing that, it's a fact. Speaking of the devil, there it is. It's always funny how when I mention their name, they just show up. But just think about that for a minute, that car insurance globally has gone up so much in price that it's starting to affect consumers' purchasing power across the world, not just in the United States. I mean, that is just staggering, guys. And they're just talking about car insurance here. They're not bringing up renter's insurance. They're not bringing up homeowner's insurance. They're not bringing up any other type of insurance, health insurance that people have to pay these skyrocketing premiums for. I mean, you could easily say that the insurance industry is responsible for half the inflation that we have right now because of how much these rates have gone up. But don't worry, like they said in the beginning, just pay attention to how low the unemployment rate is, pay attention to how high the S&P 500 is, and also pay attention to the fact that inflation is coming down, because all of those things prove that we're not in a recession. So if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And if you don't want to wait for my next video to come out, check out this one on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.